You know that war that rages inside you? That endless battle between who you think you should be and who you actually are? You wake up every morning, and the first thing you do is put on your armor, ready to fight yourself all over again. You criticize every word you say, every decision you make, every emotion you feel. There's a voice in your head that never stops, a judge that never sleeps, and it's exhausting. You've tried everything to make peace with yourself. You've read the books, followed the advice, practiced the affirmations. But nothing works, because every technique you try is just another weapon in this internal war, another way to force yourself to be different, to be better, to finally be enough. And the more you fight, the more tired you become. If you're exhausted from battling yourself, if you want to understand why this war never ends and how to finally lay down your weapons, keep watching. Because what I'm going to show you today will completely transform how you see this struggle. There's something profoundly lonely about being at war with yourself. You look around and everyone else seems to have it figured out, seems to have made peace with who they are, seems to move through life without this constant internal conflict. And you wonder what's wrong with you. Why can't you just accept yourself? Why is it so hard to stop the criticism, the judgment, the endless demands for improvement? You tell yourself you're just trying to grow, to evolve, to become your best self. But deep down you know the truth. This isn't growth. This is violence. A slow, methodical violence you commit against yourself every single day. The exhausting thing about this internal war is that it never ends. There's no victory condition. Even when you manage to change something, to fix some flaw, to finally become the person you thought you should be, the judge inside you just moves the goalposts. Now there's something else wrong, something else that needs to be fixed, something else that proves you're not good enough. You live your entire life chasing an image of perfection that keeps receding into the distance, always just out of reach. And you never stop to ask the most important question. Who created this image? Who decided what you should be? Who installed this judge inside your head and gave it permission to rule your entire existence? Most people think this internal conflict is natural, inevitable, just part of being human. They think the voice of self-criticism is their conscience, their inner wisdom, their guide to becoming better. So they listen to it, they obey it, they structure their entire lives around satisfying its endless demands. They wake up early to be more productive. They control their eating to have better bodies. They monitor their thoughts to be more positive. They measure and track and optimize every aspect of their existence, trying desperately to become the person the judge says they should be. And they call this self-improvement. They call this personal growth. They call this taking responsibility for their lives. But what if it's actually something else entirely? What if this judge, this voice, this constant internal surveillance is not your friend, but your oppressor? This is where Michel Foucault offers us a perspective that changes everything. Foucault spent his life studying how power works, not the obvious power of kings and governments, but the subtle, invisible power that shapes how we think, how we feel, how we see ourselves. And what he discovered is disturbing and liberating in equal measure. The judge inside your head is not yours, it never was. That voice that criticizes you, that demands you be different, that tells you you're not enough, it's not your inner wisdom. It's the internalization of external power structures, the voice of a society that needs you to constantly monitor and control yourself. Foucault called this disciplinary power, and it's the most effective form of control ever invented, because it doesn't require external enforcement. You do it to yourself. Think about it. When you wake up and immediately start planning how to be more productive, whose values are you serving? When you look in the mirror and catalogue everything wrong with your body, whose standards are you applying? When you feel guilty for resting, for playing, for simply existing without purpose, whose judgment have you internalized? The genius of modern power, Foucault showed us, is that it doesn't force you to obey through threat of punishment. It teaches you to punish yourself. It installs a guard inside your own mind, watching everything you do, comparing you to an ideal, finding you lacking. And the cruelest part? You think this guard is protecting you, helping you, keeping you on the right path. You never realize it's a prison guard and you're the prisoner. This is what Foucault meant when he talked about technologies of the self. These are the practices, the habits, the daily rituals through which we shape ourselves into particular kinds of subjects. And in our culture, most of these technologies are about control, discipline, normalization. We exercise not for joy, but to conform our bodies to acceptable standards. We meditate not to be present, but to become more calm, more productive, more manageable. We journal not to explore our depths, but to track our progress toward predetermined goals. Every practice of self-care has been weaponized, turned into another tool of self-surveillance, another way to monitor whether we're measuring up, whether we're good enough, whether we're doing it right. The internal war you're fighting is not a personal failure. It's a social construction. You didn't invent the standards you're trying to meet. You didn't create the ideal you're trying to become. These were given to you, taught to you, drilled into you from birth through 1,000 tiny mechanisms of power. Your parents' expectations, your teachers' grades, your peers' judgments, the media's images, the culture's values. All of it infiltrated your mind so completely that you can no longer tell where society ends and you begin. The voice you think is yours is actually a chorus of external demands that you've learned to ventriloquize so convincingly that you believe it's your authentic self speaking. And here's the thing that Foucault understood so clearly. You can't win this war, because the war itself is the problem. Every time you try to fix yourself, improve yourself, optimize yourself, you're reinforcing the very structure that's oppressing you. You're saying, yes, the judge is right, there is something wrong with me, I do need to be different. You're accepting the premise that you're inadequate, that you need to be controlled, that you can't be trusted to simply be. The war continues, not because you're not trying hard enough, but because fighting is exactly what the system needs you to do. As long as you're battling yourself, you're not questioning the system. As long as you're focused on self-improvement, you're not resisting the power structures that benefit from your self-doubt. But if you can't fight, and you can't surrender, what can you do? This is where Foucault's later work becomes crucial, his exploration of what he called care of the self. He looked back at ancient Greek and Roman practices, not to romanticize the past, but to find examples of a different relationship to oneself, a relationship not based on discipline and control, but on cultivation and creativity. The ancient philosophers didn't see the self as something to be conquered or corrected. They saw it as a work of art to be created. They practiced care of the self, not to conform to external standards, but to craft a beautiful, singular existence. They asked not, am I good enough, but what kind of life do I want to create? Not how can I fix myself, but who am I becoming? This shift from discipline to creation, from control to care, from judgment to curiosity, this is the end of the internal war. Not through victory, but through a complete transformation of the battlefield itself. When you stop asking, am I acceptable, and start asking what brings me alive, the judge loses its power. When you stop trying to meet standards and start exploring possibilities, the prison guard has nothing to guard. When you stop treating yourself as a problem to be solved and start treating yourself as a mystery to be explored, the war simply dissolves. Because there's no conflict between who you are and who you should be when you stop believing in should altogether. I remember reading about a woman, we'll call her Sarah, who spent 20 years at war with her body. Every morning she would weigh herself, and the number on the scale would determine her worth for the day. She tried every diet, every exercise program, every technique for discipline and control, and sometimes she would lose weight, and for a brief moment she would feel victorious, acceptable enough. But the weight would always come back, and with it the shame, the self-hatred, the bone-deep conviction that she was fundamentally broken. She was so tired of fighting, so tired of failing, so tired of living in a body that felt like enemy territory. Then she encountered Foucault's ideas about disciplinary power and care of the self, and something shifted. She started asking different questions. Not, how do I control my body, but what does my body need? Not how do I make myself acceptable, but what would it feel like to simply be? She began treating her body not as a problem, but as a wise animal that had been trying to communicate with her all along. She listened. She rested. She moved in ways that felt good rather than punishing. She ate when hungry, stopped when full, trusted her own sensations rather than external rules. And slowly, over months, and years, the war ended. Not because she won, but because she stopped fighting. Her body didn't become what the magazines said it should be. It became what it actually was, and she discovered that was more than enough. So what does this mean for you, right now, in the middle of your own internal war? It means you have a choice you might not have known you had. You can keep fighting, keep trying to discipline yourself into acceptability, keep listening to the judge that tells you you're not enough. Or you can begin to question that judge. You can ask where it came from, whose interests it serves, why it demands what it demands. You can start to distinguish between the voice of internalized oppression and the whisper of your actual self, that quiet knowing beneath all the noise. This doesn't mean you stop growing or learning or changing. It means you approach your own becoming with curiosity instead of criticism, with care instead of control, with creativity instead of conformity. This transformation won't happen overnight. The patterns of self-discipline, the habits of self-surveillance, they're deeply grooved into your neural pathways, reinforced by years of practice and cultural conditioning. There will be days when the judge seems louder than ever, when the temptation to go back to war with yourself feels overwhelming. That's okay. That's part of the process. The point is not to be perfect at self-acceptance, because that would just be another standard to fail at. Meeting, another way to weaponize care into discipline. The point is to keep returning to the question, am I treating myself with control or with care? Am I trying to force myself to be different, or am I curious about who I'm becoming? Am I obeying external standards, or am I creating my own existence? And here's something crucial that Foucault understood. This personal transformation is also political. When you stop disciplining yourself to fit society's expectations, when you refuse to internalize the surveillance and judgment, when you begin to create yourself according to your own values rather than imposed norms, you're not just changing yourself. You're resisting, you're disrupting the smooth functioning of power. You're showing others that another way is possible. Because the system needs you, compliant, predictable, constantly monitoring and correcting yourself. When you withdraw that cooperation, when you stop being your own prison guard, you create a small space of freedom. And in that space, new possibilities can emerge. Foucault also talked about practices of freedom, the specific ways we can cultivate this different relationship with ourselves. It might be as simple as noticing when you're about to criticize yourself and choosing curiosity instead. What am I feeling right now? What do I actually need? It might be questioning a rule you've always followed. Who says I have to be productive every moment? Where did I learn that rest is lazy? It might be experimenting with doing things you're not good at, things that serve no purpose except joy, things that can't be measured or optimized. It might be spending time with people who see you as you are rather than as you should be, who reflect back your actual worth rather than your imagined deficiency. These practices don't look like much. They're not dramatic or impressive, but they're the slow, steady work of dismantling the prison and learning to live as a free person. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it's not about achieving some final state of perfect self-acceptance. It's about the ongoing practice of relating to yourself differently. Some days you'll do it well. Some days you'll fall back into old patterns of self-judgment. That's fine. That's human. The practice is in noticing, in returning, in choosing again. And over time, something shifts. The internal war that once consumed your every waking moment becomes quieter. Not because you won, but because you stopped investing your energy in fighting. You start to experience moments of genuine peace with yourself, not because you finally became good enough, but because you stopped believing in the validity of that measurement altogether. What Foucault offers us is not a technique for winning the war against yourself, but a way to see that the war itself is the problem. The judge inside you is not your friend. The standards you're trying to meet are not your own. The constant surveillance and criticism is not making you better. It's making you smaller, more frightened, more controlled. But you're not stuck with this. You can begin right now to practice a different relationship with yourself. You can treat yourself as a work of art being created rather than a problem being solved. You can ask what kind of life you want to craft rather than what kind of person you should become. You can end the war not through surrender or victory, but through a fundamental transformation of how you see yourself and your existence. This is not easy work. It goes against everything you've been taught, everything the culture rewards, everything the internal judge insists is necessary. But it's possible, and it's happening for people all over the world who are waking up to the realization that the prison they're in is one they were taught to build around themselves, and therefore it's one they can choose to dismantle. The bars are not as solid as they seem. The judge is not as powerful as it pretends. You are not as broken as you've been told. You are a human being engaged in the lifelong project of becoming, and you have the right to do that, becoming on your own terms, according to your own values, in your own way. So here's the invitation. Notice the next time the internal judge starts its litany of criticism. Just notice it. Don't fight it. Don't believe it. Just observe it, as you might observe a radio playing in another room. See it for what it is, the internalized voice of disciplinary power, not your truth. And then ask yourself a different question. Not how can I fix this, but what do I actually need right now? Not what's wrong with me, but what's trying to emerge. Not how can I be better, but how can I be more fully myself? These questions won't give you immediate answers, but they'll start to create a different space inside you, a space where the war can finally end, where you can begin to practice the art of your own existence, where you can discover that you were never the problem that needed solving. You were always the creative force that could choose how to live.